As you enter positions of trust and power, dream a little before you think. Toni Morrison. Bending Not Breaking, Season 4, Episode 3, The Revelation. And welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking. I'm Sunshine.
This is Ben.
And we are talking Legend of Korra.
Legend of Korra.
Book 1.
Book 1.
Episode 3.
Air.
The Revelation. It's the Book of Air, right?
Yep.
And we've got Max.
Max.
Who's here. Hey, Max.
Hey, fellows.
It's good to hear your voice. Always glad when you're around.
Yeah, sometimes.
I feel the same way.
About what he said or what I said?
About him being around.
We'll leave that up to the interpretation of our vast audience.
Indeed.
Ben, how are you doing?
It's kind of rainy outside, but you know what makes a rainy day better? Being with y'all.
Oh, stop.
Right?
Love that.
It's better. It's better that way.
I like a little rain sometimes.
I don't like cold rain.
Yeah. What about hard rain that's gonna fall?
I don't get it.
It's Bob Dylan, Ben. It's Bob Dylan.
Who's that?
It's Bob Dylan. It's a person
Huh?
who writes music. People have heard his name before.
Who?
People have heard of Bob Dylan.
Max, you ever heard of Bob Dylan?
There's a whole movie about him.
Yes, I have heard of Bob Dylan. I wasn't sure who to yes and in that moment.
I was wondering if he was going to say not at this time. I was waiting for it.
I don't hear about him often at this time, but yes, I have heard of Bob Dylan.
Yeah. A hard rain's gonna fall.
No.
The times they are a-changin'.
Tangled Up in Blue.
So you do know who Bob Dylan is.
Buckets of rain, buckets of tears.
Got a heart
Got them buckets
of
coming out of my
gold.
ears, buckets of moonbeams.
All right, let's
in
talk
my
about
head.
this episode. We are speaking through a lens of
Bob Dylan.
little spoonerism for you.
Yeah.
Let's jump into the lens of this episode.
What is the lens of this episode?
power?
Power.
Itty bitty live in space.
Infinite cosmic power.
Yep.
Yeah.
Power.
Power.
I got the power.
I can't do another song. I don't know them.
Yeah. Was that
What?
is that a factory? Who sings
Power.
sings the I've got the power?
I got the power. Max?
I don't know.
The song is by Snap! Exclamation point.
Why was that so loud?
There's literally an exclamation point at the end of the
Doesn't mean
band
you have
name.
to yell at me.
No, that's exactly what it means. It's the same way you have to say the movie Matt Dillon's The Informant.
Okay. Cool.
Matt
So we're
Damon.
talking about power.
Matt Damon. Bob Dylan. Matt Damon. Matt Dillon, completely different person.
But also an actor, right? Am I thinking?
Yeah, you're right.
I don't know
He's
who that
in,
is.
like, Wild Things
Yeah.
and
The Outsiders.
that
So
the Ben Stiller vehicle with
S.E.
Cameron
Hinton's
Diaz.
The Outsiders?
There's something about Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That you don't know?
Anyways, we'll get back on. We're already off. Let's get back on
Y'all are off.
track. Let's talk about power, shall we?
Power.
In this episode, because it's a lot. There's
There's
a lot.
There's some power in this episode. Yeah.
So let's first start. What is power?
Well, MLK defines power as the ability to achieve purpose and affect change. Defined. Does not currently define, but defined.
Yeah, the ability to do something or act in a particular way, the capacity or ability to direct influence or the behaviors of others. Verb-wise, it's to supply with energy.
Yeah. Just a source or means of supplying energy. Right. Yeah, well, and one of the things that I think about power that's really important is you really cannot engage with conversations about leadership without engaging with conversations about power.
Correct.
Right? You can't. Like, it's not possible to talk about leadership without talking about power.
And here's my thing, because I think this is where my hypothesis is leading me.
Hypothesis.
That's a second grade word.
Is it?
I didn't know you spoke parcel tongue.
All right. So,
Oh no.
All right. So this idea that power in itself is not inherently good or bad. It's the same
Correct.
way I
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
about
yeah.
like tools that we have or emotions or anything else. Like it's not good or bad. It is how we use that power to influence change into what we use power for.
Yeah. That being said, we
Also,
often
the way you get to power can also be good or bad, I think.
Sure, but I think one of the things that about that is often the connotation around power is negative. Like a lot of people perceive power as like a strong arm experience, or like people using power to maintain it. Right?
I want to control
Power
as
is,
many
like,
people and things as possible.
Exactly, and so when in reality, it's also like one of the worst things we can experience is powerlessness, not having any power, right? And so that like both sides of that's really interesting place to be. Like no one wants to feel powerless. No one likes feeling desperate and isolating without power. Right?
Yeah, or this inability to have any say in your life or any potential to move or do anything like that.
Well, and I think one of the things that kind of helped me kind of process this idea of power is to think about there's a model for thinking about power, and there's power over, there's power to, there's power with, and there's power oh my god, there's one more, within. Like I have power within me. So those are the kind of different kind of variants there, and it's interesting to think about like how that works and how that manifests. And so I have a few like contrasting statements for you that contrasts power over versus power with or power within. Yeah?
Yeah,
so
let's do it.
Here's a few. Being right is more important than getting it right is a power over mindset.
Yes.
Right? Versus getting it right is more important than being right, which is a power with. Right? And I think that's one of the ways you can think about it. Like there's a lot there that you can divide that into. But also power over looks like believing that power is finite. Believing that you have to like use fear to protect and to hoard it, right? That's a power over idea. Power over also looks like leveraging fear to divide, to destabilize. It devalues decency because decency is framed as a sign of weakness. It's for suckers, if you will, right? And so that's kind of like power over. There's a lot of other things you can look at there, but power to, within is believing that power is infinite and it expands when we share it with other people, which is a pretty vast mindset for like the American culture, right?
That does not fit well within Western ideals.
It doesn't. And so also with that is like we leverage connection and empathy to unite and stabilize rather than to, like hoard the power and not give it to anyone else. And so we kind of unite with each other. We value decency as a function of self-respect and respect for others, right? So we're not holding on to it and hoarding it. And so I think that there's a lot of nuance between the two differences, but what we can see, and especially in this episode, is we'll see a lot of power over moves in this episode that we'll talk about. And I think there's a lot of power with moments too. And I'm just excited to kind of look at the difference between them and how it kind of manifests in the episode.
Oh, for sure. Let's do this. Let's jump in. Let's start, Ben. You have a recap
I believe
to
it's
do.
your turn.
It's not even close to being my
I'm
turn.
almost 100% certain it's your turn.
That little bit of uncertainty, that's actually the correct response. So I'm
pretty
giving
sure it's your
30
turn.
seconds on the clock
Sunshine.
to recap
I don't
this entire
understand
episode.
why you try to get out of
and
it
away
every single
we
time.
go.
Mako and Balloon look for, ways to attain 30,000 yuans because, they want to participate in the pro bending tournament, but they can't because they don't have any money. And so Bolin's like, oh my god, I can work with Pabu. And then he goes on, Pabu like does little tricks, but no, then Triple Threat Triad is like, oh my god, come work for us. And he's like, okay. And then Korra and Mako go looking for Bolin, and they encounter a group of chi blockers who had kidnapped him. And then, oh my goodness, the Equalists. Oh my god, and then they flee because the Equalists are Equalists. And then Korra and Mako are like, no, we can figure it out. And so they go find this protester. They get to the rally. They find it. They invade it. And then they rescue Bolin, and everything's great. From the otherwise doomed fate.
Everything is not great.
It's not great.
I also love the line of the equalists are equalists, so they flee, which means like, what does that even mean?
I had to turn
The equalists are equalists, so they flee.
Yeah, like I did my best. Listen, I did my best here. Okay, just because I'm really bad at this doesn't mean that you should do it every time. That's the only way to like solve this problem.
Absolutely not.
I think you should do it every time.
I appreciate that.
I think you do it so much better.
That's not even true.
Yeah.
I'm sure I mess up all the time. I might mess up next episode. All right, let's talk about this episode. Let's talk about the one we're currently on.
Episode 3.
Moments of power.
The Revelation.
Yes. Moments of power for you throughout this. Let's what's the first big moment for you, Ben?
Yeah. Okay. So I have a problem like immediately.
Sure.
So this concept of pecking order, and like legacy with having the worst training time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it lends itself to a system in which it is preserving the power and privilege of those who already have it. Right? It is not an equitable way to provide training times.
Correct.
To all of the participants in this pro bending tournament. And so my question is, like, what do you do with that? How do we fix it? What are the ways that we can counteract that power dynamic?
So that to me is a process issue, right? It's the idea of how are we scheduling this out? Is it equitable? Is this serving the most marginalized group as well as the one that is least marginalized? What's the process that needs to be in place? This one is hey, you're currently the one who is quote unquote in most power. You get to pick when you go first.
So
Everybody else has to wait.
But the question is, who does it serve, right? Who's making this rule, and who does it serve to make this rule this way?
Right.
Right? And so my question is, like, are the best benders able to make this a rule because they want to preserve their power and privilege as being number one?
Yeah, because we don't know if this rule is being given by the gym owner or if this is one that's because the people who are the oldest and considered the best have finagled their way into saying we're getting the time and you can't stop us from taking that time.
And I just think I really don't love this way of doing it. Like the idea of like seniority playing a role in who gets what here doesn't seem fair. And I would love to offer them some guidance.
So how do you challenge that with the idea of like, oh, this is a perk for you being loyal, or this is a perk for you working for this organization for so long, so you get the first dibs at this? Like, how do you challenge that mentality of like, no, this is a reward? Is it because the reward's a detriment to other people?
It is. And so if you think about the history, like who has the privilege of being in the pro bending tournament in the first place, and who had the privilege beforehand, right? And so if we equate that to like legacy programs in colleges, for instance, colleges offer legacy programs, or at least that is a myth that may or may not be true depending on what college you're attending. But essentially, like, oh, well, my whole family has gone here, so I'm a shoo-in. Well, that speaks to a long line of history and privilege that you have had, that you were allowed to go to this this system in this place, in this system, right? I said that twice. But you're allowed to for so long before the people that could not. So BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, people of color, were literally not able to go to certain schools.
Legacies don't exist, right?
And so, like, how do you have a legacy if you weren't even allowed to engage with it? And so in this situation, it's like, sure, we're going to reward these people who show loyalty to the school by continuing their whole family coming here. Well, how do you build loyalty if you can never get in? Right?
Correct.
And so this is a really complicated issue. There's a lot involved here. But ultimately, I think it's how do we make sure that we're being equitable with who can join, how they join. Why is there a $30,000 or 30,000 yuan fee? That makes sense. You got to have winnings, but at the same time, like you got to put it in to win some. Like I understand having an ante. You got to ante up, if you will. But at the same time, like how do we have grace, and how do we build in equitable means to ensure that anyone who comes to this place can participate?
Well, I think that's something that you're lifting up right now just with this moment, but it's going to happen throughout the course of the episode, even though the type of power dynamic is going to change. And what we're talking about, this idea of questioning who's in power making the decisions.
Yes.
Why are they in power making those decisions? How did they get into power? And is this right? Is this what we should be doing? Because there might be times where you're like, they're in power. They got there, and we agree with the way that it happened.
Yep.
and they're making decisions that we feel good about.
Yeah.
Like, that's okay. But you might also get to points where you're like, how'd they get into power? All right, they bullied their way there. They're using the power they have to influence the system so they continue to stay at the top of it.
Yep.
And it is hurting people.
Yep.
Not okay.
Yep.
How do we work against this?
Yep.
How do we chi block the system?
Indeed.
Right.
Ooh.
Right?
I like it.
That's a moment and that's a moment for me, and we spoke about it at the end of last season, but this idea of taking away resources.
Yes.
And in the moment of oppression, what that feels like, and so this idea of how are we taking away resources from those that are doing the oppressing?
Yeah.
Which isn't a perfect analogy, but it also, can we talk? We'll talk a little bit about that, of like this moment in this episode where the Herald, the protest leader, or the
Okay. Yeah.
is talking about being oppressed by Korra.
Yeah.
And this idea of
This is a tough moment.
there are a lot of like moments that we get throughout the course of this show that hit you in the gut, because we've been built up over 3 seasons of Avatar: The Last Airbender to identify with benders,
Yes.
right? We and identify as like benders are awesome and we love them and that's who we want to be and we're
Yep.
going to be benders. And now we're getting this moment of being pushed back on of, hey,
The Avatar is oppressing me.
the Avatar is oppressing me. Is bending great? And we're going, oh, like, yeah, that dude doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, we are conditioned at this point to be like, to jump in and be like on the side of Korra, because we're supposed to be on the side of the Avatar.
Yes, and the first several times I watched this scene didn't bug me. It didn't, because I was on Korra's side. I was like, yeah, Korra's in the right. Amon and the Eagles are they're the enemy. But their message is really, really important.
And here's what we're getting to this point of this understanding of, is there a power that comes with bending? Is there a privilege that comes with bending?
Yes.
The
Period.
answer is yes.
Period. Like, hands down.
And I think you get to this moment of, all right, so how is bending being used?
Mm-hmm.
And right now you have a group of people that are telling you that this power of bending is being used to against them, to keep them from having jobs or to keep them from being equal in a society. They start to then attack people for it violently,
Yep.
right? Like, and there's a line, right? But this idea of bending itself is you being a bender or having that privilege of power is not inherently bad. It is how are you using that to support everyone?
Is it power over
Or is it power with?
or is it power with?
Correct.
Right?
And you get this moment where she's using her ability, and she's not bending at this point, but she's using her strength, physical strength, which is another form of power.
It is a power over move.
Yep. And to keep him quiet. Or
Yep.
to get information from him.
Yeah, and like I felt really uncomfortable when Korra did that. I really did. I was really not okay with how she handled it. And she doesn't know how to do it any better. She has not been taught. She hasn't been given the tools to do it differently, which is what, like, one of the things that Andre talked about in his episode in our finale for Atla was these are skills we have to hone and craft, and like we have to practice. And Korra has not been given any skills, much less had an opportunity to practice them, right? And so it is her responsibility, with having so much power, to learn these tactics in order to not oppress, right? And this whole season is in a way, in a sense, giving her lessons on that. And I wish she could have learned a different way. But
Correct.
you know,
Correct.
but yeah, this moment, because like part of me is like, everything that this protester is doing is he's doing it right. He's doing it in a public forum. He's doing it he's nonviolent. He is actively speaking out against bending in a way that is not harming anyone else. Like, he's doing everything right.
Until you get that moment where he's like, you're gonna get it. If your friend's a bender, he's gonna get it, right?
Yeah,
Like, because then that's
like,
an awareness of like, all right, there's some violence that's coming. There's some
Yes.
but that's tough. This situation is not. It's gray. It is so gray.
Yeah.
And there's nuance to it, but you have to understand that there's a power dynamic difference between benders and non-benders in this episode.
100%.
In this season.
And for those of you that have not read the comics, I highly recommend visiting the comics.
Beautiful segue. They did a really good job. I guess you could call it retcon, right? But they do a wonderful job of connecting
Leading
the
us to
dots,
Korra.
and you get to that point, especially by the end of Imbalance, which is
Yes.
the last current comic out. You're like, this makes.
But even before
We're in
that,
a
they were
place that
addressing it.
Yep, we're in a
North
place where
and
this
South
really
and-
makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, that's our little side plug. If you haven't gotten the comics, and I definitely recommend checking them out because it just opens us up to a lot.
Can we also talk about the power of money?
I wrote that down. What did you write down about it?
There, in several ways, the power of money, this ability to kind of sit there and say, all right, well, for us to even participate in the system that we want to be in,
100%.
we got to have money to get in.
Money is power.
Yep. So there's that. There is the idea of money is shifted for information. For them to be able to figure out where Bolin is,
Little Scoochie.
is required money. And so this idea of, especially when you're in a capitalistic system, this idea that, all right, money is going to have to be the currency that allows me and gives me access.
Yep.
And so what happens when we take money away from people?
Well, and money was a theme all episode. Like from the moment Butaka comes in and says, "Hello, hardworking street urchins," right? And then, "Hey, here's your prize money," and then it's all mine.
Which
Right?
shows that like he just had to exist for that money to fall into his hands, right? Like I just had to
Exactly.
give you access to things.
Yeah, and he not only does he use that money, but he leverages that position to take their money and to gain and to maintain his status, right? And then this idea and concept that's immediately thrown in your face with the Avatar. Oh, I've never needed money. Like, you know what I wrote down is Korra like really shows her privilege this episode.
Yeah.
All episode, and I think this is one of the reasons people don't like Korra, is because she shows her privilege. One of the reasons I love Korra is because she shows her privilege, and then we see her grow, right?
Well, and this is also an example of like she's privileged in some ways and not privileged in other ways, right? And so like this is a way that she has been privileged. It's not need for money, and it doesn't mean she doesn't struggle in other areas.
Correct.
It just means that this is not something she's had to deal with.
Yeah. Well, and then money continuing the thread is like it leads to when in their younger days, Mako and Bolin joining the triple triads, joining the lightning bolt Zolt and being a part of that. And then it again leads Bolin to choosing that again. And it's one of those things with money is a powerful leveraging tool in all ways. And Korra like responds to Mako's youth being, were you a criminal? And again, it's where her privilege is showing, because as soon as he says, no, hold on, here's why, and here's what was going on, she's like, oh, I had no idea, and is able to learn quickly. But it's one of those things where money forces people to make decisions that they would not normally do. And that is an abuse of power, right? For people who own it and have all the access to the money.
Yes. And so the question with all of this is who's giving these people the power to exist in this space, right? So how, who's allowing the landlord to be what got him to this position of power? How is he there? Is that right? The idea that this money is how you navigate the city, who levied that information to make that possible, right? Who's the one that set that system up? And the reality is we know that it was Aang. Like, we know that it was Aang that creates this world. Now, he might not have created capitalism.
We see that Aang didn't create this world. This world emerged, and Aang was responsible for, like, giving it the banks of the river. He did his best to hone in the things that were going wrong.
And so we do understand this idea of, though, if we're not checking processes along the way during the creation process, there's going to be
100%.
issues that happen.
Yes.
And we've got to be willing to recheck those things and recheck power dynamics over and over again, nonstop, as a continual
Absolutely.
check to say, is this doing what we initially thought it should be doing? And if the answer is that it isn't, we need to find a way to stop it and pivot.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
So-
It's just, this is really tough to talk about, because this idea of Mako going into the power plant. And so it's one of those things where, like, that's a literal form of power, like energy source power.
Right.
kind of
Yeah,
a deal,
he's
right?
powering things.
And so, like, he, as a lightning bender, has the privilege of being a skilled worker in this capitalist system, right? And so,
A non-bender can't go get that
a non-bender can't get that job, right?
Even with studying.
Even
right?
with
like,
skill and studying, exactly.
like-
This is literally only firebenders who have developed the ability to lightning bend can get this job.
Yep.
And that is a form of like that's a really niche job. There are jobs that involve talents that I will never have, right? And I will never have that, right? And I struggle because that's a form of privilege and power. And so that job that exists is a really nice thing for firebenders that can lightning bend. But it's also one of those things where like, okay, but if that's the only job available, that's all, and I can't do it, then like, what do I do? So I don't know. There's just a lot there where this just the power of being able to employ people is a very interesting power to have. You know?
Oh, absolutely. What are there any other moments of power that popped up for you in this episode? I mean, besides all of it, but what is there anything else you want to dial deep into?
Yeah, I want to. So Amon's speech, or rather his introduction, if you will.
Yeah, I wrote down this.
Yes.
We seem to be on the same page on a lot of this.
And, you know, that's how it works.
Like we hang out.
Yeah. So the rhetoric that was used to introduce Amon was, "This is our hero and savior." And what we see is these are a bunch of people who feel powerless because they are not able to bend. I'm somewhat projecting that, but I, as a non-bender myself, imagining what it would be like there, I would feel powerless, and
Especially if you can't get work.
and I'd feel resentful, and I'd feel a lot of things.
Especially if the police force is only benders.
Yeah. And so when I hear this hero and savior has been blessed with this ability to take away bending, I'm like, I have mixed feelings, right? Because one, I'm so thankful that somebody has the ability to take it away, but at the same time, I'm not at the point, like in my head, I'm not at the point where, wow, let's take away their bending. You know, it's just really tough.
Well, and so let's dive into the language a little bit, because
Yeah.
before they even know that he can take away bending, he's our hero and our savior.
Yeah, this is before that. Yeah.
By using that rhetoric, it starts to take away the ability to question whether or not his next move is one that we want to be a part of, is good or is bad, right? So like this idea of like, because he's called and set up as the hero and savior, whatever he does must be right.
It also, yes, and it also doesn't fix the fact that I feel powerless.
Correct.
It makes it so that I have to rely on Amon to solve my problems, right?
Yeah, but we see the language being used, and we see the power of language in this moment. We see the power of language in the way that it gets the attention of police, and the way that it makes people feel in this moment of like, all right, great, you've set up the language. I'm here because I'm feeling powerless. You've set up the language to now be in a place of, all right, your decisions, if you're the hero and the savior of this story, then what you do must be right. And so clearly I'm going to be in a place where I'm seeing him take power. He's not giving it to me, but I'm seeing him take it. And so is that a step in the right direction? I feel good about this. I'm getting on board.
Yeah, it's hard to think about this because if we kind of break this down and think about like the equalist movement, there's a lot to be said for the need for an equalist movement, frankly. In a world where like law enforcement is run by the privileged, in a world where this is a world that it like caters to those who can bend, it's one of those things where an equalist movement is necessary. The problem with this is it the right move to strip people of their bending, right? To strip everyone of their bending.
Which Aang battled with, right? But the difference between Ozai and Bolin is this idea of Ozai has shown repeated behavior over and over and over again to use his bending to hurt others.
Yeah, well, and so his lightning bolt Zolt,
Right.
right? But does that mean that we should take his bending away? And the answer might be yes, because I don't know. I don't know the answer. But for me, one of the things I think about is having that power is a lot like having a weapon on me. Because if I use it that way, it becomes one. Frankly, right? Like, I can use bending as a weapon, and we see people leveraging it that way. And so what happens is when you continue to wield your weapon and you're not being held accountable, then you need to be held accountable. Do we take the weapon away? Or do we like put you in a position where you just can no longer wield that weapon? And what we see the Avatar verse typically take on is typically they put you in a position where that you just cannot wield your weapon, right? We see
You're
that
in this cell.
you're
right?
going to be in this cell, like it's harking to season 3, right?
Right.
And so it's just one of those things where like, what do you do? What is the right move? Do you strip them of their bending? Like, there's a lot there. I don't know.
It's who watches the Watchmen, right? Like,
Yeah, who watches the Watchmen? Yes. Yeah, it's hard. But one of the things that I do love that the Equalist movement is doing is they're teaching people to chi block. I think that's a good thing. People should be able to chi block, especially if you aren't a bender. Like, I would want to be able to do that.
if someone's attacking you,
Yes.
Yeah.
I would want to be able to defend myself. I would want to be like, and knowing that they're in a world where there are gangs that are strictly full of bending people. Like there's you know what I mean? There's a lot, and we explore those gangs in the Korra comics too. But it's one of those, like, there's so much going on to where I think chi blocking is and by its very nature and the way it's phrased, it's chi blocking. It's not chi attacking, right? Sometimes it's used
it is, yeah.
in offense, but in concept, it is a defensive thing.
Well, and again, if it's a tool, like any other tool, how are we using it? Are we using it to live into our values and to support other people? Are we using it to attack and harm? Right? Like, it's how are we using any other tool? So we're still living in this place of it's a big gray area.
Yeah.
But who's in power? How'd they get in power? And are they doing the things that live into our values? And are we asking those questions?
Well, and I'm really curious for our listeners too. Like, we are clearly not going to be able to hit everything that is in this episode or in any episode.
Please send
right?
voicemails
Like
on your thoughts on this episode, because this is so tough.
Especially with frankly with Korra, that we're hitting things that are really poignant and topical for us today. And we're not going to do it justice. I'm just going to put it out there, and we want your help. So send us that voicemail. Give us some help. Help us see it a different way. What are we missing? Because we need you to help us do that.
So we've hit on the power of money in this society, the power of language.
Yep.
Who is wielding the power and how do they get it?
Yep.
How do we challenge that? The answer is, I don't know if we've really answered how do we challenge that. The first step feels like asking the question.
First step is awareness. Recognizing that there is a power dynamic in play.
Yep.
Because often we just go through the motions of living and we don't recognize that this is something that could change, right? This isn't just the way that I was raised. Like, I wonder, like, the difference between, I find it's really interesting is Mako goes into this saying, I'm going to work within the system. I'm going to go get a job that I can get. I'm going to go do these things. And Bolin tries to even work within the system, but then is lured outside of the system. But the system itself is
flawed.
It is flawed, period. And so how do you navigate the idea of working within the system if you don't know that there's a system in the first place? You have to become aware. You have to become aware that there are power dynamics in play. And you have to aware who are the people in power that made this decision. Why did they make this decision? And if this is a decision that is this something that we can address? Can we go to the council and address it? And there's just a lot
and maybe
there.
they've tried.
Yeah,
Like, maybe
absolutely.
they've tried at this point. So much to dissect, and it hits it home.
Yeah.
All of this feels really relevant.
Yes, it does.
And so the first step is questioning. And that might be the only thing we have as a takeaway today is how do we question that and how do we become aware of it?
Well, and like for me, it's interesting to think about too, like what happens in our bodies when someone is leveraging power over us. What does it feel like? What happens in us when someone is leveraging power over versus leveraging power with? Because when someone says this is how it's going to be, there's no other way, and you have to pay, like we shrink, we get smaller, we literally fold in on ourselves and become less. And I think the goal here is how do we build people up to become open and grow and be like, instead of folding up, we're opening up. And so I think when I'm feeling like I'm folding in on myself and when I'm feeling like I'm getting smaller, that can be a flag and say, okay, what's going on here? Why am I feeling this way?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be a starting point to asking those questions.
Just let your body tell you when you're in need of something, right? When you have these feelings that say something's going on, something is different, homeostasis is being messed with right now. Why?
Well, we have to normalize discomfort.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
we have to move away from the shame and blame and toward accountability and meaningful change. Because what happens in that power over culture again is this idea that like power over people give others someone to blame for their discomfort. This is exactly what Amon does, right? He gives someone to blame. The avatar is doing it wrong. The spirits have told me that the avatar is not okay, right? And he says that. And so preferably you pick someone that looks, acts, and sounds different than we do. And so Amon has this mask. He's theoretically a non-bender. He has been blessed with this power. And so he blames benders. He blames the avatar. When we blame others, that is a form of power over, and we see Amon do it right there, you know?
And so I wonder, because is training kids to chi block or training people to chi block, that seems like a power with.
Let me give you a tool that
right?
can help you have agency.
So that
and
feels
feel
like power
like
with.
power. Yeah.
Right? And so it's tough because Amon is showing us power over. We don't want to do that.
Yep.
And power with, which are like, yay, power with.
Yeah.
But like, and I think that continues to confirm this gray area of like, there are people who are empowered that will do some things that are not okay, and there are people who empower who will do things that are okay under the guise of like, look how good I am, right? Like, it makes me think of philanthropy with multi-billion-dollar organizations.
Tell me more about that.
It's just a weird side tangent of this idea of like, I'm going to do these things, these moves that are clearly not okay. I'm going to underpay workers. I'm not going to pay a living wage.
Amazon.
Right? I'm not going to do those things. But I am going to give $10 million to this organization that fights for climate change.
Which in the grand scope of things.
Which is like, or you could pay people a living wage as well, seeing as how you're worth this much,
and
right?
you
like
still continue to
exploit and do
Yes.
things. Amazon commercials always make me chuckle because they're like, we're spending
in a very dark way.
Yeah, but it's just it's correct. And this idea of like, we're doing these commercials, we want to lower our carbon footprint. And I'm like, I've got 1,000 ways you can do that. I don't understand why you're telling me like we're going to do all this in the next 20 years. And the reality is like, or you could just stop doing X, Y, and Z. Like, you've got the power to do this. You've got the money to fund the research to do it.
Yeah, it's hard because this, again, going back to the power over versus power to and power with, like what happens in power over dynamics is people who use power over incite hatred and violence. That's a power over move.
Absolutely.
And it is used using persistent dehumanizing language and policies. And Amon is modeling this when in his rhetoric. And it's not centering connection and humanity. It's not centering empathy-driven agendas, policies, and values. It's not. That's the power with. It's like it's not a message of. It's like it's the dark. He says, "Oh, we're all going to be equal," which is something that I just want a more equal society. But like that's a really dark version of what's going on here. Like that is a very like seemingly healthy thing when really it's very deceptive.
His version of that is very deceptive.
Yes. So I don't know. It's just there's a lot there. It's not great. But frankly, neither is what the benders have been doing. So,
well, I don't know if we've seen a lot, but we've seen some things, in regards to bending. But we're not seeing. We see more in the comics. Like we get a whole lot in the comics around like what benders are doing to create this divide, and we see this over time. But it's tough. It's tough.
What else? Anything else?
we hit on everything that I wanted to chat about that was lifted up for me. So if you've got something else that you want to bring up, but overall, it's really just the more and more as we watch Korra, the more and more I realize like this is going to be probably more challenging for you and I in the space that we live in. And so we're really excited to bring other voices to the table in a big way for these seasons so that we can continue to learn through this process as well. Because even within this episode, like I'm thinking back and saying like, I wonder how this comes off, right? Like I wonder how this comes off or what could I have done differently, but.
And I think that's helpful for our listeners to know, right? That I feel insecure about having conversations around this because, one, I'm not an expert, and that automatically feels insecure. But, like, also, this is so important that I want to do it right, and I don't know that I am.
And there's going to be lenses where we go, were we the ones to talk about that lens, right? And I think that we're just continuing to learn and grow through this process as well. But this is, I think, with this episode specifically, if you've got feedback on it, please send it in and let's chat about it. Let's talk about it and lift it up. We would love to hear it. Time for a quick break, or you got anything else you want to hit on?
I think we're going to break, and then we're going to go into maybe a little bit of a fun little imagination exercise.
A little bit of a practice.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, friends. Thank you for listening, continuing to enjoy this conversation about the Legend of Korra with us. We are about to engage in a fun little exercise that we did in our prior seasons, and we're revisiting this time. So this is a practice of imagining ourselves into the show, where we try to put ourselves into the thoughts, feelings, the bodies of someone who's actually experiencing what happens in the show. And the idea behind it is that we are able to experience things differently than we would by watching as a spectator just on our couch or however we choose to watch it. And so theoretically, we can learn a little bit more about the experience by developing some empathy by imagining ourselves into the moment. And I've picked a short clip for us to imagine ourselves into. And so theoretically, you can imagine yourself into the moment as a fly on the wall. You can be a specific character. You can put yourself into the person who is speaking. Whatever works for you and wherever you take yourself is totally fine. You can even do it multiple times if you want to replay it and imagine yourself as multiple characters. But what Sunshine and I will do is we will imagine ourselves into the scene and we will just kind of figure it out. And then we'll talk about what we learned and experienced from that exercise. The goal here is make sure that you're in a place that you can kind of close your eyes and really get a sense for the audio. If you are driving, I don't recommend closing your eyes. Make sure that if you do, you're doing it safely. You can still practice even without, closing your eyes. Mm-hmm. It's just a recommendation.
Yeah.
So, without further ado, we're going to play a short clip, and just so that you can kind of prep and figure out what kind of character you want to be, we are going to listen to Amon's speech to everyone who has shown up for the revelation. And here comes the clip.
My quest for equality began many years ago. When I was a boy, my family and I lived on a small farm. We weren't rich, and none of us were benders. This made us very easy targets for the firebender who extorted my father. One day, my father confronted this man. But when he did, that firebender took my family from me. Then, he took my face. I've been forced to hide behind a mask ever since.
All right, everyone. That gives you an opportunity to listen. If you need to, you're welcome to rewind a few seconds and listen to it again. But what we're going to do is we're going to first listen to Sunshine, and we're going to find out who he imagined himself into and what did he feel in his body, what were the senses, thoughts, tastes, sounds? What happened? So, Sunshine, what happened for you as you experienced that?
Yep. So I put myself in the as a spectator in this event, someone who's just at the rally.
So you're a non-bender.
Non-bender at the rally, and you hear the story, and it speaks to you, right? Like, it speaks to me of this understanding of the pain you've gone through, and understanding where all this comes from, and how tragic that story is, and you believe it, and I believe it, and I feel throughout, and I feel anger, and I feel sadness, and I feel empathy for Amon in this moment, and it's easy for me to want to back him and support him.
Interesting. So it kind of like created more, like you're more on his side now than you were even before. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If taking this all at face value, like, and saying that as someone who knows Amon's story outside of that realm, and knowing that this is not the mantle for him to pick up, because it's not, he is not in this place. He is not experiencing these things the way others are. And so it is not his role. Like, as we sit there and go, like, the Equalists have a point. Yes, and Amon is not the person to take up the mantle of leading that, right? Like, that is not his place to do that. But as a spectator, not knowing any of those things.
Well, and that story is common. We heard
Right.
that story all through Atla, right? We heard people of getting like ravaged
Hurt.
by the Fire Nation
Yep.
and getting hurt, and it seems like that's a common thing. And
So you believe that too. You hope
Yeah.
you hope that Zuko's brought change. You hope that that's happened over the time frame that this has all gone down, and so, but you don't know. Like, and it's still
Yeah.
possible. You're like, well, you don't know how old Amon is, and so maybe this is people. It's after the 100-Year War has ended, right? But it's still possible that this has taken place, and so you sit there and go, yeah, I believe this.
well, and things don't change as soon as the war's over, right? The mindsets
Correct, yeah.
like take forever to change, and so I imagine there's just a lot of residual angst there in that. So that's so interesting. Okay, so
I think that's important to remember the history of that, right? Like, that happened to my grandparents is a very possible
Oh, man.
response that could have happened, especially if you're in a place of, I was on the side of that war that was 100% a bender war.
Yeah.
And I felt that as a non-bender.
Yeah.
I was on the side of people who couldn't fight back because of that, right? So there's got to be a lot of feelings that are there.
Yeah. So I took a different approach. I was Mako. And I as a firebender, heard this and I was like, I have, like, in my head, I said, this is the same story that people keep on telling. That was like what went through my head. Like, this is, it's not, all firebenders aren't like this.
Not all men, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
But you got to check that, right?
But like, that was what went through my head. Like, not all firebenders are like that. Not all benders are like that. And like, I felt defensive. And
For sure.
Like, and I felt in my body, my chest started to clench up. I was experiencing that, and I was just like, no. And I was just really kind of upset at Amon and upset with the whole thing, because it was like painting it of course they're using all the facts and using all the stories to help their side and help their argument, right? Yeah, so like being in that kind of place felt kind of grody in a way.
That's so tough, because you have to question, like, is this a story, or is this really what's happening? Like, what side of this am I on, right? And how do I find out what the real truth is?
Well, and the problem is, it wasn't that I didn't believe Amon. It was that I was mad that this is like, God, another firebender did this, and why are all like it was a mix of like, not all firebenders are like that, and why are some like that? You know, why is it like, why do a few ruin it for all of us? And those are stories that are really damaging, right? Because if I let that story and if I let that question dominate my navigation of this problem, then I'm just as problematic as Amon is. You know? Maybe not just as problematic, but like very problematic.
As we kind of go deeper into this, I think that's kind of what we're talking about, is when we are looking at issues around equality, equity in these moments, right? And who's got the power. Mm-hmm. It's what is the problem? Like, what is the root of this problem? Because I don't know if bending is the root of this problem, or if it's how people are manipulating benders to create this problem, right? And so that's the question that hasn't been asked yet, and I think that has to be it. Like, what is the deep root cause of this? And how do we get after that, and how do we tackle that? Because taking away bending I don't know if that's going to solve the problem.
Yeah,
it will
I
only
agree.
likely leave people, because Amon's likely not going to take his own bending away.
Nope.
Right, so that's just going to put him in a position of power later on. And so it's how do we get to what is the root cause of this? But it's tough to see that. That takes a lot of question asking, and there's a lot of info there.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to hear from y'all. We've asked before in this episode already, but this is another opportunity. Like, as you heard this and you put yourself and imagine yourself into this, who were you and how did you feel, and what emotions and things came up as you listened? Because we want to know and want to share that with the rest of our listeners as well.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and jump into devotion. I'll start. We're going through the element of fire.
Fire.
And for me, I think I through this conversation, through talking throughout this episode, there have been several times where I was like, I want more information and I want to know more. And that itself, I'm saying, is lighting a fire under me to go seek that out this week and say, how do we learn about power and learn more about privilege, and what resources can I find to help learn and be more equipped to dismantle things that I need to dismantle, or to ask the right questions. And so that has lit a fire under me, because I have not felt confident in some of the things that we've spoken about today.
And I want to feel confident.
I want to feel confident.
I want to be able to speak on this better than I am.
And so that's my goal for the week, is to go find resources and seek those out, and to do that.
Yeah, I think that will be mine as well. Just kidding. Yes, and I want to do that. And one of the things that I thought about, and I've been talking about it a long time now, it feels like, but this idea of power over versus power with. And power, we said at the beginning, is not negative or positive. It just is. And I feel like fire is the same way. It is a tool, and it can be used oppressively, or it can be used to aid. And I feel like anytime you use fire with the other elements, it always ends up being something really powerful. We see it in this episode even. Like when water is heated up, it becomes steam, and it can power a steam engine. When you use fire, you can heat up stones and can provide heat in a nice little sauna, and it's really enjoyable, right? When you use fire with, it becomes something that makes something better. But when you use power over, when you use fire as a means of control, it becomes a really big issue. And so for me, it's really sinking into this idea of what are the things that I'm doing, and how do I make it more with rather than over? Like, what are the things that I'm engaging with in my life, and how do I make it more cooperative?
And I think that's it's a big takeaway of how do we do that in every aspect of our life. How do we create things, how do we do things with as opposed to over?
Exactly.
How in my own personal relationship with my partner do I make sure that we're leading in our own household with each other?
Exactly.
How do I do that with even on a hierarchical level of work and the people that I support? How do I view that as I'm supporting them, and how do I bring them in to make decisions to move the needle forward, as opposed to I'm dictating this over you?
Yeah, that's big. That's huge. It's huge.
It's Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Gratitude. Yeah. So
yeah,
I love gratitude.
Yes.
It's wonderful. I'm grateful for gratitude. I'm also grateful for the show The Legend of Korra. And one of the things that I love about it has a female lead. One of the things I don't love about this episode is she's the only female in the episode.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, for an episode with a female lead, it is awfully male dominated.
Just fairly true for the we get more.
We absolutely get more.
But not now.
Yeah. So, like, we, again, just reminding for people, and for people who maybe have just joined us, we are committed to, when we share gratitude, always lifting up at least one female. And so we might hear a lot from Korra this series if it continues to go this way. But we are always grateful to lift up Korra regardless. So I'm grateful for Korra. I'm grateful for Korra for a lot of reasons. But one of the things I'm grateful for her for is her immediate ability to say, "Let me help you," to Mako. Mako comes looking for Bolin, and she just immediately is willing to say, let me help you. And I know as Mako, I was that person. I was the person, I am fiercely independent. I don't like accepting help. I can handle it all on my own. But Korra's just like, let me help you. And that moment really, for some reason, it really stuck out to me as really beautiful. And I think one of the, like, obviously Korra has a crush on Mako at this point, but one of the things I love about that is love helps us be more likely to have a power with relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really something for lifting up. So I'm grateful for Korra, and that is why.
I'm gonna go with Naga.
Oh, I love Naga.
You're right. So maybe a little power from within, a lot of strength and force that she has, and she does it to support
for sure
Korra and Mako. Naga takes them around the whole city.
She sure does, and she's fast,
super fast. Yep, and so
keeps up with all the motorcycles.
They wouldn't have been able to find Bolin without Naga,
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, that's I'm giving gratitude to Naga.
Here, I love it.
Because Naga deserves a little bit of praise.
Everyone deserves praise.
That's true.
I love it. Well, we can only pick one, but you can pick anyone. And who would you like?
Yeah, let us know
to be grateful for.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful episode, Ben.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to learn some more.
Yeah, we're going to continue to learn. That's why we're doing this, continuing to learn, right?
And help us learn. Follow us at BNB_pod on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all those places. Yep.
Join our Facebook group.
That's right.
You can become a patron.
That's right.
Support us and help us continue to learn.
Get some bonus episodes, some mini episodes. Help us choose lenses. All of those things are available through our Patreon. So go check that out.
Sometimes we do little pop-up live episodes.
We've done those. That's right. Those have been fun.
And so, been fun.
Can we also give some gratitude to Max?
Max, do you have anything to contribute for the episode?
Not at this time.
And yet we're still grateful.
Absolutely. You do so much for us, so thank you for all of that.
Scenes, y'all. He's really important.
Once again, I'm Sunshine Mayfield.
This is Ben.
And this has been Bending, Not Breaking. Thank you for listening.